Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. All right. So, as Evan said, a couple other things in terms of introduction-wise. So, a faculty member at the University of Kansas, I've been teaching online and variation since '99. Actually, the first fully online course I taught was for the University of Georgia when I was at the University of Kansas. And so, like you, been involved with this online bit for a while. Now, my brief time together, I want to focus in on, there we go. We're going to focus in on some things a little differently. In a way, I think they plan nicely. If we think of the day as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, figure that's, aligned with we'll see. Well, yeah, we can do organic peanut butter and jelly and stuff like that. But anyways, the bread, Cindy and Kelly, or Kelly and Cindy, and I'm kind of that jelly and peanut butter. Hopefully not peanut butter and bananas, and that what I said, never mind. So, but I'm going to do things a little differently in terms of the accessibility. And so that's why I'm seeing myself as kind of that filler, as then I think Cindy will kind of reaffirm some of the things that, as Kelly's saying, I'm going to go a little bit outside the box, but in so doing, think of all learners that we're trying to work with, both at K-12, but more importantly, of course, in higher education. So with that, I'm going to mention several things, particularly this idea of universal design. And I heard that in several of the breakout sessions. Of course, Kelly made reference to that as well. And so with that thought, I thought we'd do very briefly when we think about the learners we're working with. And of course, we're working with lots of different learners in higher education. One of the things that I want to remind everybody about is that when we tend to think of, at least today so far, when we've been talking about disabilities, we've been talking sensory physical, we've been talking blind, we've been talking deaf. Aaron has a physical disability. And as Cindy was making reference to the fact that, maybe Tori, I would like to think of Cindy in terms of the cognitive abilities. We haven't been talking so much learning. We haven't been talking attention. We haven't been talking of executive function. Over 11% of students on college campuses today have disabilities. And so that definitely means it's much more than sensory and physical. The majority of those individuals have learning issues. And that's the folks I want to focus on for the moment. And by the way, that's old data. It's almost 10 years old. National trends are showing much more. And depending upon where you are, if you're a 2 versus a 4-year and the type of institution you are, or more of a technical, the percentage of individuals with disabilities isn't going down, it's even going higher. Okay? That's not even including struggling learners and your English language learners and things of that nature. All right, so when we think about that, our college students are very diverse, lots of different things going on, lots of different needs. And the reason I want to bring this up is, yes, we have our requirements with accessibility, but if we think of the variety of learners we have, a lot of things come to mind for me in terms of design and what we need to do for online learning. And it's not just going to meet the needs of the individuals for accessibility, it's going to meet the needs of a variety of learners, particularly those with learning disabilities and the like, but also those other struggling learners. Now, one of the things in the literature, I'm always looking at research because, of course, I want to make sure things are effective and efficient, but one of the things, as many of you are already probably familiar with, is this idea that, by the way, online learning, not only is it economically feasible, not only will it broaden the scope of the individuals we can serve, that's a lot of the conversation going on in our area, but also it's personalized, it's individualized, it's data-based, there's pathways, we can monitor individuals' progress and they can make decisions based on their needs. It says best thing since sliced bread, let's drink the Kool-Aid. And I'm with you there. But oftentimes we'll also assume that individualized or personalized means, oh, we've got those kids with disabilities, we've got those young adults, we've got those non-traditional students with disabilities. And oftentimes there's a little caution there in terms of what we're doing, whether or not we are or we're not. And so right now, let's do a bit of a caution in that respect. So with that thought in mind, this clicker, okay, one of the things I want to reinforce with this visual is the fact that when we think about these learners, when we think about accessibility, when we think about accommodations and the like, one of the realities is if you take a look at that visual, oftentimes we're not thinking about those learners I just mentioned. So the majority of individuals with disabilities, if we even think about it in that respect, have learning issues, attention issues, organization issues, executive functioning issues that basically have an impact on what we, memory issues, on what we expect of the individual. And yet when we tend to think about accessibility, we often talk physical and sensory. Kelly was mentioning it, but the best example I can offer is the following. Let's think of a building. Let's think of this building in terms of accessibility. So I come up to the doors when I walk in, and there's going to be a ramp. That's accessible, okay? Or there's going to be no stairs. I come to the door, it's going to be it's going to have an electronic opening aspect. It's going to allow me to come into the door, into the space without me having to have a physical push or pull, etc. Right? Then I go down the hallways, and if this is multi-level building, it's going to give me an elevator, so I can get in there for accessibility. Get to a classroom, it's going to have a wider door, and that door is going to allow me to open it, and the wider door to allow, if I'm in a wheelchair, for me to get in. Accessible environment. Take that to online. Great. Check, check, check. Some folks were talking about checklists for accessibility. Check, check, check. I met the accessibility. But I get into the room, you haven't changed. Now it's all accessible, but learning, all the traditional learning takes place. Well, for a child with learning disability, a struggling reader, and if you folks think you're working with folks that are not struggling readers, I mean, how many of us are working or designing for folks that are struggling readers? Well, let me say it a different way. How many of you folks think you're designing only for individuals that have reading levels of 10th grade and above? Okay, good. That's right, okay? Because our average level of reading when we graduate, what's the average grade level? Reading 6th grade, about 6th grade. What, 6th grade? About 6th grade of the average reading level in terms of graduation from high school. Now, of course, are they all going on to college? No, but we have a lot of individuals that we're designing for where reading is a challenge. So go back to my accessibility example back into the classroom. If I simply say access means you get to come to the classroom, but now I expect that you're 22, so your reading level is at least 12th grade. Oh, whoa. And that's what elements of accessibility are basically accommodating for, is that, okay, the material's available, but have we altered the material? So let's think about that here, all right? So when we think of our guidelines tend to think about, and then remember, I'm the peanut butter and jelly, because Cindy will come later on and clarify what Sean said wrong. But with that said, I mean, the overall idea of the overall accessibility focus is physical sensory. So if we think of that, all right, I'm going to come up with some solutions, all right, in terms of design. And I'm not saying we don't design standards out there. So for example, some additional things besides WCAG, I'd suggest to you the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. It's focused on K-12, but it gives you lots of good information on educational materials in terms of how to deal with digital educational materials from an accessible format for instruction. Just another resource for consideration. I think it's one that I shared as pre-reading. So it's just so it gets along with that same idea that we've been talking about in terms of the access that you've been introduced to so far. Okay? But let's think about that missing individual. Let's think about the majority of individuals we're going to serve in higher education that either have a disability or that we're going to try to retain because they're going to struggle with our learning. All right? Now, in the past, fine. They're going to struggle with our learning. Fine. Freshman to sophomore year, especially undergraduates, we don't care. I mean, you take a look at our national averages, freshman to sophomore year, we're not retaining a lot of those learners. They're gone. Now, in the past, some universities, no problem. Some programs, no problem. But now, in the more competitive environment and expectations, like the University of Kansas, one of our primary top 3 issues is retention. And retention means trying to meet the needs of learners. Okay, that's one of the issues. Okay, so with that, let's think about this missing individual that we're losing and all the things we're asking them to do online. So what are some of the solutions? Well, Kelly referenced it. I'll give a brief video of it. But one, of course, is so we give you digital content in an online learning environment. We're going to make sure we give you it in a manner that the tools can automatically help with, let's say, struggling readers. So I imagine several of you are using things like text-to-speech. Read-Write does it. It's a Chrome app. It's already built in. Depending upon the environment, something that's already purchased, or there's variations of this that are free. So an individual, as long as they have the digital content in an accessible format, bingo, they can listen to it. They can do a lot more. So here, let's just do a little video of it, just to kind of give you a sense of what it's all about. Where's my mouse? Here's my mouse. And just to kind of give you a sense.
Read and Write for Google Chrome is this friendly toolbar that installs neatly in your Chrome web browser. So it plays nicely with all these classroom devices, PCs, Macs, and Chromebooks too. It's there whenever it's needed, making it easier for students to work with Google Docs and other documents like PDFs or EPUBs. It also works with web pages. Okay, let's see how easy it is to use. Highlight any passage of text and hear it read out loud. You can pick different voices and adjust reading speed to suit any listener. Speech to text accurately transcribes your students' words as they talk. It's ideal for capturing thoughts on the fly, especially for people who find typing tricky. Word prediction helps reluctant writers, offering word suggestions as you type. There's a talking dictionary, picture dictionary, and fact finder that make research faster, easier, and more fun. And there's a translator for other languages, such as French and Spanish. These colored highlighters are really useful for collecting and summarizing key information. Just pick out key points and gather them together in a new document. Why not try Read and Write for Google Chrome today?
So if I'm thinking of Aaron earlier, Aaron's talking about the need for text-to-speech. Well, actually, he was talking about more speech-to-text. He talked about Dragon. So Read Write offers that. Aaron was talking about the need to highlight. Read Write offers that. The text-to-speech, to be able to listen to, if I'm blind, to be able to listen to text. And then, of course, if I need to be able to see it, if I have a vision impairment but I can still see it, it will highlight the words to be able to give me more attention. A lot of good things going on there. A lot of great things going on there. But what it doesn't offer is the content change. The content still is what it is. So if my reading level is such that I'm not understanding, even if I can hear it, well, I can hear it. It'll highlight the word. It might increase my fluency, but not necessarily my comprehension. Now, for me, now I'm designing. Now the need to design goes beyond just accessibility. It goes to help lots of different learners that are going to be in my freshman, sophomore required classes. They're going to help me with those technical students that weren't the best readers to begin with, and now they're coming in and potentially being pushed into an area that they were challenged with to begin with. Things of that nature. It might help my English language learners, etc. So with that thought in mind, all right, and there's some other tools. We'll deal with that later. That's text-to-speech. But let me ask you guys to do this for me, if you would. Go ahead and stand up, and I want you to find a wall, not the front wall, and just stand against it, okay? Just find a wall and stand against it. There's lots of different walls to stand against. All right? We have limited time in our 45 minutes, so already I know I've been kind of trying to share some things but missing some connections. So let me reinforce. We have accessibility requirements. We have technology that allow for accessibility requirements to be met. If we think of just accessibility in the small population we're trying to serve, sensory and physical, I'm not sure if it's worth our effort. Now, of course, Kelly and others will tell you it's, of course, required, so will I, but I don't want to plan and design in that way. I want to plan and design for the variability that's in my environment with all the students I serve. Now, you folks over here have to be careful with what I'm about to ask you to do because there's a step there. So I'm going to give you some options here, and I want you to take either 1 step forward, 2 steps forward, or 3 steps forward. Okay, so listen to the options, okay? So first of all, we're all ice cream eaters. We're all ice cream eaters. I'm sorry, you lactose intolerant folks like myself, there's a pill we can take. So we'll take the pill first, all right. So I want the folks that say chocolate ice cream is the best thing, take a step forward. Vanilla ice cream, I'm a vanilla ice cream eater, take 2 steps forward. And you're like, calories? If I'm going to deal with the calories, I'm eating Chunky Monkey or Cherry Garcia. Take 3 steps forward, okay? All right, so we've all moved, okay. Next question. I hope some of you took a vacation over the summer, okay? So, summer vacation. 1 step forward if you're saying the beach. The beach is where I need to be. Take a step forward. 2 steps forward if it's the mountains. Oh, the mountains are where when I take a vacation, it's got to be the mountains. 3 steps forward, you're an educator or something like that, so basically staycation is all you can afford, but 3 steps forward if the staycation is what you do for vacation, okay? And I guess for the rest of you, I'm sorry I didn't accommodate for whatever the choices there are. And yes, you folks running into those tables, you might want to get around the other side of the table, feel free, all right? A couple others here in terms of options for this concern of variability, and of course I need to look at my notes because I need to, okay. So you folks are prepping, you're doing some work. It's quiet work, meaning you're sitting down, you're writing, you're typing, you're getting ready for design, you're planning for your course, whatever it may be, you're grading, whatever it may be. 1 step forward if you need to basically have music in the background. Music has to be in the background if you're going to do that work well. 1 step forward. 2 steps forward if you're like, no, music's too much, but white noise. I need to have a fan going on, I need something going on. 2 steps forward, when I'm working, I need something in the background. 3 steps forward, if you're like, forget about it, it needs to be as quiet as can be when I'm doing that type of work, okay? All right? All right, one last one here, one last one. And let's see here. Okay, one last one here. So you're all going to see, a movie's coming out that you love. You know you're going to watch it, okay? I want 1 step forward if you're going to go to that movie theater within the first week because you just can't wait to see that movie. 1 step forward if you're that type of movie watcher. 2 steps forward if you're like, no, I need to see it in the movie theater, but I'm going to wait until, 3 weeks on or something like that. 2 steps forward. 3 steps forward, you're like, forget about it. I'm waiting until it comes on, Netflix or Redbox or something like that. All right. Now look around, okay? I'd argue, in terms of the positions I'm hearing you guys have, you're very similar in terms of your background in education, in terms of your expectation, in terms of a lot of similarities. I know we're here in the States. Maybe there's some international travelers, but most of us are the States, many of us here in the Midwest. So when we take a look at variability, we'd probably say there's a lot of similarities, and yet you look around for just 4 or 5 different things that are very common. Look at where some people are, okay? And then we have people way in the background that still, either they weren't paying attention or, they took their 1 step more, they paid attention to that 1 step. So think of the variability here, right? And yet people would say, no, there's no variability, we're very similar. Go ahead and have a seat, all right? This to me is very important. In terms of how we design and plan. All right? So I'm going to go with what many of us feel. Well, I think today, this group here, we don't agree with this, but society believes in this, and that is the following. Folks, welcome to the University of Kansas. You've all been accepted on an athletic scholarship. Woohoo! All right? Yeah. Now, where are my booers, your Missouri folks, or are you wearing purple because you're K-State? Yes. There you go. Okay, all right. So it's a free education, so you'll take it. Okay, there you go. All right. So if you're going to be at KU and you're going to do a sport, what sport's going to be? Basketball. Softball. What are we going to do over here? Tennis. What are we going to do? Esports is always somebody. There's actually scholarships being provided, I think in Kentucky now. What sport? Rodeo? What sport? Tennis, all right, okay. One last sport. I haven't heard the big sport, of course. Who's going to play football? You going to play football? Okay, excellent, all right. Now, we at the University of Kansas believe that society believes that there's an average. And first of all, you've been recruited because you're phenomenal athletes. And it's going to be a full ride. And by the way, full ride, you're going to get all the swag you want. But the only thing you're not going to get is the nice, when you travel, they ask you to dress in a nice, appropriate outfit. But going to classes and the like, you're going to get sweatpants, you're going to get sweatshirts, you're going to get t-shirts, you're going to get polo shirts. You're going to have more sneakers you're going to know what to do with, okay? But we, like the rest of society, believe the fact that although you're excellent and you're excelled at, there's an average. And so therefore, that shoe swag you're going to be provided is going to be in size 8. Female, women size 8, okay? So, guys, anyone going to have a problem with that? Okay, all right. So by December, you can either pay to come to KU or head on out because you're losing your scholarship. All right? If you're above that size 8, I'm sorry, your performance is going to suffer. We're going to see that, and we're going to say we're rescinding the scholarship. Now, you folks at size 8, you're like, phew, all right. Below size 8, we'll get you an extra pair of socks or 3 pairs of socks, okay? Now, this is silly, right? And yet I'd argue we do a lot of things with this idea that there is this average. Oh, and then, so we're going to design for the average, and then we'll just modify and accommodate and things of that nature. And yet, that to me is a major, major headache. I mean, when I think of a classroom when I'm working with students, a classroom of 30 students, if I thought there was an average, I mean, I'm going to go gray really quickly because, my goodness, I'm going to start grouping these individuals. Well, there's an average I'm going to work with, but then, there's a bunch of gifted kids. They know this stuff before they're coming in, so I'm going to have to design for them. Well, then there's these other individuals that are really struggling. I find out that they are below in reading level. Okay, I have to design for them. And then there's individuals, a growing population in the state of Kansas, English language learners. Then there's a group of individuals that are first-generation college students, and they're struggling as they transition in. The list goes on. So with that in mind, and we think about that, Todd Rose actually has a nice little introduction to this, and he does it in respect to pilots. and this idea average. And we'll let him kind of take it from there.
It's 1952, and the Air Force has a problem. They've got good pilots flying better planes, but they're getting worse results, and they don't know why. And for a while, they blamed the pilots. They even blamed the technology. And they eventually got around to blaming the flight instructors. But it turned out that the problem was actually with the cockpit. Let me explain. Imagine you're a fighter pilot. You're operating a machine that in some cases can travel faster than the speed of sound, and where issues between success and failure, sometimes life and death, can be measured in split seconds. If you're a fighter pilot, you know that your performance depends fundamentally on the fit between you and your cockpit. Because after all, what good is the best technology in the world if you can't reach the critical instruments when you need them the most? But this presents a challenge for the Air Force, because obviously pilots are not the same size. So the issue is, how do you design one cockpit that can fit the most individuals? For a long time, it was assumed that you could do this by designing for the average pilot. That almost seems intuitively right. If you design something that fit for the average size person, wouldn't it fit most people? It seems right, but it's actually wrong. And 60 years ago, an Air Force researcher, Gilbert Daniels, proved to the world just how wrong this really is and what it was costing us. Here's how he did it. He studied over 4,000 pilots, and he measured them on 10 dimensions of size. And he asked a very simple question. How many of these pilots are average on all 10 dimensions? The assumption was that most of them would be. Do you know how many really were? 0. Gilbert Daniels proved there was no such thing as an average pilot. Instead, what he found was that every single pilot had what we call a jagged size profile, right? It means no one's at the same on every dimension. And this makes sense. Just because you're the tallest person doesn't mean you're the heaviest. It doesn't mean you have the broadest shoulders or the longest torso. But this is tricky because if every pilot has a jagged size profile and you design a cockpit on average, you've literally designed it for nobody. So the Air Force realized they had a problem, and their response was bold. They banned the average, meaning that moving forward, they refused to buy fighter jets where the cockpit was designed for an average-sized pilot. And instead, they demanded that the companies who built these planes design them to the edges of dimensions of size, meaning that rather than design for, say, the average height, they wanted a cockpit that could accommodate as close to the shortest pilot and the tallest pilot as the technology would allow. Now, the companies that made these planes, as you could imagine, weren't happy, right? They argued and lobbied, and they said it's going to be impossible, or at least impossibly expensive, to build a flexible cockpit. But once they realized that the Air Force wasn't going to budge, suddenly it was possible. And it turned out it wasn't that expensive. And in fact, they made great strides, leveraging simple solutions that we all take for granted in our everyday lives, like adjustable seats. And as a result, the Air Force not only improved the performance of the pilots that they already had, but they dramatically expanded their talent pool. And today, we have the most diverse pool of fighter pilots ever. But here's the thing. Many of our top pilots would have never fit in a cockpit designed on average. So most of us have never sat in the cockpit of a $150 million fighter jet, right? But we've all sat in the classroom. And I would argue I would argue that these are the cockpits of our economy. And I think we all know that we have some problems.
So, for me, the point I'm trying to make here with us is that, yes, we have to design for accessibility, no question. And yes, by designing for accessibility, we will offer access for those individuals with physical sensory issues primarily to our coursework, which is critical. But if we go designing with this idea that there's this average, and we don't design for the edges, to me, I'd argue, I'm not sure what the effort and the design and all that, if it's worth it. But if we go this idea that there's variability within the learners that we're serving, even if we don't have a group of individuals with disabilities, which I'd argue, let's take a look at your institution you're working with. It's going to be highly unlikely. So if we are designing for individual disabilities and the other variability of learners, then how do we design, Sean? If we go and we have the accessibility requirements, what else do we use? Good question. So if we think of variability, by the way, that reading at a certain level to me is a critical one with online learning. And let's just say this out loud. The majority of online learning, and I've done research on this, so I'll argue with it, the best of us, the majority of online learning is text-based. It requires a level of reading. If we have individuals that struggle with reading, or they're not reading at the level that we've designed for, hence they struggle with the reading, that is going to be a barrier, and it's going to be a variability we need to design for, okay? So then, of course, there's lots of other variability there. So when we think of it, oftentimes people will say, and I heard it today already, we need to think of equality and equity. And so some of you have seen this before. And make sure you take a look at the very bottom of what they're standing on in that picture. They're standing on little boxes or crates. And the idea here with equality is that we give everyone the same crate and that the two of them can't look over the fence. So many people would argue, well, we need to do equity. And I'll associate this with accessibility in that, well, we're designing now for individuals that need access. But the problem I'm still having with this picture are the darn crates. See, because the crates to me take time. And I'm an educator and I've worked with students with disabilities for 25 years. And I can tell you it takes time to design and accommodate and the like for individuals if I'm going with the crate model. I instead, over the last 15 to 20 years of my career, have been going with this model, universal design for learning. And that is, I'm going to realize the barrier that I'm presenting to the learners I'm trying to reach based on the standards I'm trying to teach. I'm not lessening my standards. The state of Kansas tells me what I need to do. In some instances, the national government tells me what I need to do. So what I've done is I've removed the fence. No, Sean, the fence is still there. You're exactly right. The fence is still there. I removed it from a transparency perspective. So I've designed very purposely that in many instances, I'm not going to need the crates. Now, there'll be some accessibility things I'll need to design in addition for. At generally times, it's not perfect. But in this instance, I'm now designing for those edges. And now, by that effort, I'm designing for a lot of different learners. Okay, so let's think about a few things. Let's get you guys feeling like it is to have some barriers, okay? This is a picture that you haven't seen this picture. Maybe some of you have. I've stolen this from How Difficult Can This Be? But many of you know what this picture is a picture of, okay? So I want you to look at it for a moment. And, for my purposes, I've assigned this as an instructor within my online class, and I'm going to do an activity with you. You now have to do an assignment. And think of this as a reading. You had to do this reading. And now I'm going to give you a little presentation online. You can download it and you listen to it, and it's going to be closed captioned and all that. But I'm not going to go back to what you read because, you read it, you understood it, now we're going to make some connections. But the problem is many of you are looking at that going, I have no clue what that is, so I have no clue what the reading was, Sean. or I expected a certain amount of fluency, or I introduced some new vocabulary terms that, you know, to me, oh my goodness, I've known those vocabulary terms for years. And you're like, I have no clue what you're talking about, vocabulary terms. So the instruction I provide afterwards is going to be significantly impacted, it's going to be a barrier, based on what you can't do there. Does anyone think they know what this is? Okay, a couple of us, okay? Have I lost you and you're like, oh, come on, we're just waiting for lunch, Sean. Okay, so you're with me, okay? So folks, it is a cow. And it's looking at you. I'm still seeing a lot of blank stares. Like, what are you talking about, Sean? Okay, all right? Now, I could design from an accessibility standpoint, and I could have my alt tag say it's an image of a cow. But the problem is, that's like making my text accessible for text-to-speech. I can now hear it, but the problem is you haven't changed the text, you haven't scaffolded the text, you haven't organized the main idea, you haven't helped me with vocabulary. So many of you are still not seeing it, although you know it's a cow, okay? Now, in some worlds, people would say, oh, okay, for you folks, there's a special room down the hall, or for some of you folks, sorry, you're not allowed in my program. Well, to me, from a design perspective, I want to make sure you know it's a cow so I can go on from there. So basically, I'm going to do a little drawing for you. You see the ears? Do I have a little thing here? Yeah, there my one ear, there's my face kind of going around with it. The body's here. Oh, come on. Sometimes I get these, ohs, now I see it, no? So, okay, you seen it's a cow? Yeah, okay. Some of you are still not seeing it's a cow, and maybe we do need to send you, well, regardless. So here's the cow. So if I get my clicker to work. So back and forth. So there's my cow. So my idea here is that we're trying to design then for, you know, different issues. And so universal design for learning is one format to do it. I'd argue it's a very effective format. And by the way, in 2008, it was part of the Higher Education Reauthorization Act, saying institutions of higher education need to integrate UDL as a key component of what we're doing. Now, have we been successful in that? No. I mean, I think there's pockets where we have been, but overall, no, there's not. Now, there's a video here. It's a resource. This is available. I'll let you guys take a look at that at your leisure. So overall, though, the key concepts of universal design for learning are three primary principles. This is a review for some, introduction for others. It's based on what we know about learning. It's based on the brain. It's not special education, and it's not K-12. It's higher education, K-12. It's actually in both laws right now. In K-12, they're required to consider it, and Every Student Succeeds Act. And for our folks, the last 10 years, we've been required to consider it for the reauthorization of higher education. So basically, it has three different components. And basically, number one is the green. We need to make sure that we design where we're engaging the variability of the learner. So to engage the variability of the learner, we better think about the needs of the learner. And so from an engagement perspective, it might be everything from how we motivate. And we know, in anything that we've learned in the last 10 years about learning, we do need to engage the learner. This is not how I engage you. I totally understand that. I think standing up and doing a little of that variability, a little bit better engagement. And you're like, well, how do I do that online? Well, there's lots of different ways we can engage online. We offer scenarios, etc. All right, the what of learning. Then I need to give you the representation. If I'm giving you text, I better give you additional options to that text to make sure you're understanding what I'm trying to share from a representation perspective. So I can give you text with video. I could give you text with images. I could give you a graphic organizer to go along with the text. I could scaffold the text. I could pull out elements that are critical to the main idea of the text and focus on that in terms of my presentations. Lots of different ways I can do it. And the third element is I better allow for you to demonstrate what you know to me in a variety of ways. Sean, online, that's kind of limited. I mean, multiple choice, essays. Well, there's lots of different ways we're finding in online learning to allow individuals to demonstrate what they know. I mean, that flip video is one big one in terms of, talk me through it, walk me through it. Easy way to offer a presentation. But there's lots of different ways for me to share what I know. And by the way, I can still use those traditional assessments. But again, depends upon what I'm trying to do. So UDL, from a framework perspective, when you go deeper into it, does it get to the accessibility, Sean? It sure does. So let me give you an illustration, and I'm about to run out of my time here. But just to give you an illustration here, every single one of those areas I offered, 3 principles, have 3 guidelines. And every guideline has 2 to 3 checkpoints. So for example, in this one, let me kind of walk you through it here, okay? For those that can't read it, underneath engagement, provide options for recruiting interest. Then, provide options for sustaining the persistence, and then give them self-regulation, empower them. Of course, you're all trying to do that. You're all trying to do that with your learners. Now, from a bicycle analogy, I look upon this as I can look upon it going down, but I can look upon it going across. So the first instance, I'm going to basically be the one guiding you. You're going to sit in the back seat with me. So I'm going to provide options for perception. I'm going to provide options for physical action. Perception, that's all about what Kelly offered this morning. Sorry, my name's Kelly. Okay? So then, my next section, though, is I'm going to get you do it with some training wheels where now I'm sustaining, I'm providing options for language, I'm providing options for expression and communication, you're expanding it. And then the third level of my design process is now I'm empowering you for self-regulation, I'm giving you levels of comprehension, and I'm trying to really help you with working memory, organization. I'm giving you a lot of structure. You know, a lot of our learning online requires a level of executive functions. It really does, and a lot of learners struggle with that. In terms of that independent learning, do you have a due date? I'm teaching 2 classes right now fully online. One due date is Monday evening, one due date is Sunday evening. I bet you guys know what I do Sundays and Mondays. Okay? I mean, yesterday, the amount of texts it was a big assignment due yesterday. Wait a minute here, you know, it's like, okay, so part of me wants to step in and say, well, maybe we should have started that 4 or 5 days ago, so you're not texting me, you know, 5 hours before it's due, asking me some questions that I know is going to take you 5 hours to answer. So, never mind. So, I know you guys are there with me, so, okay, all right. So with UDL, all right, with UDL, we're really planning for a variety of different learners. We're designing for a variety of different learners. And in so doing, we're getting at some of those accessibility, but also getting at some of those struggling learners, those with learning issues, and the like. And part of what we're realizing is we're considering some of what we do, curriculum-wise, might be disabled itself, or more importantly, it's providing barriers. Now let me give you an example here, all right? So the researcher in me said, we need to do some research on this. And this is a tool that's available to you. It's a bit clunky. It's our first stage, and I'm not trying to advertise the tool, I'm trying to advertise the evidence. Now we did this several years ago, and we said, hey, we wanted to look at online learning, and we wanted to look at the availability, not the accessibility. We wanted to look at the availability of online learning to struggling learners and those with disabilities. And we said, how are we going to do that? And so we thought about the Universal Design for Learning Framework. And we said, well, what if the Universal Design for Learning Framework was used to determine the availability or the accessibility for students with disabilities and struggling learners? And so what we did was we took the UDL framework and basically created a scan tool. And so we took the principles and the guidelines and some of the checkpoints, and we created items for them. And so each of those areas have an item. And so it's a skip logic, and it's all of 36 questions. Now, of course, if you answer yes, you get more questions to answer. If you answer no, you just skip, 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 skip. And what we did was we looked at this on several different learning management and content management systems. This was on the Khan Academy. Now, so I know some of you use the Khan Academy. Others of you, you're doing your own work. You're designing and placing it in Canvas. Now, some of us are also, as Kelly I mentioned earlier today, some of us are using content management systems where we're not designing it, we're using the content system that's provided. So what we wanted to understand is from that systems, how much is it aligning with UDL, if we believe UDL plans for variability. So you can take a look at the scores across, and we looked at math lessons, science lessons, history lessons, and subjects combined. And you may be saying, Sean, this is a little bit more K-12. Well, bear with me in terms of the data from a design perspective, which of course many of us are focused in on. What we found was it was looking pretty sad. Here, let me give you a visual of this. It'll help better, okay? So basically, the gray is what's possible. The gray is what's possible. The color is what actually we found. So we sampled lessons, we looked at lessons, we went through lessons, and we scored the lessons based on the UDL guidelines. And we said, you could score 36, and basically, like levels of comprehension, folks. Are you scaffolding? Are you offering organizers? Are you offering any additional supports to help the individual comprehend the language, comprehend the words? No, we're not. okay? So, and by the way, was closed captioning there? Sure, every single one of Khan Academy's videos are closed captioned, so it's not that. It's not the accessibility, it's more the cognitive. So in the area of, for example, perception, just to narrow it down, does it offer alternatives for visual information? We found it did not. Does it offer alternatives for auditory information? Yes. These are your accessibility components. So it's doing all right with that type of compliance. But then you focus in on, wait a minute here, options for mathematical expression. This is Khan Academy. They started with math. And we're finding out, no, it doesn't. Clarify syntax? No. Supporting decoding? No. Understanding across language? That's basically providing it in multiple languages. So on a lot of these scales, for variability of learning, we found it's doing a kind of a poor job. And then finally, in the area of comprehension, and this is what I mentioned, for transfer for generalization, we want you to read, to learn, to generalize. For processing visuals and things of that nature, you guys probably know this. For years, textbooks, one of the limitations of textbooks was the graphics and the tables that went along with the visuals of textbooks were often tied to the text. Therefore, if you didn't understand the text you read, you wouldn't understand the visual that went along with it. We still have that problem in online learning. Oh, we'll go offer you a bunch of visuals, but you need to understand the text to appreciate the visual. But I'm having trouble with the text. So this is just a bit of a taste, just a bit of a flavor to think of the fact that we've got some work to do. But in my argument, this is where I'd want to spend my time doing the work. In terms of the design, where I'd want to spend my energy would be working with folks to at least let them know. Now, I may come across a number of faculty that they don't want to listen to me. I may come across a number of folks that say, we already have the curriculum designed as it is. We need to think more accessibility. But maybe that next level of design, or as Kelly was mentioning, that next level of purchasing, we'll think of UDL. And so to me, this is a consideration that will then not only go for that sensory and physical disability, but all variability, just as a consideration. Now, my time is up. I do want to offer you a resource. If you want to read more about this study we did, a couple years old, it's online, it's free. I'll just leave this up here for you for the moment. And I know we need to switch slides, so that's probably going to be, so if you want to take a quick picture, if that's of use. If not, we'll put it up later. It's one of the resources I also gave you in your pre-reading. But that gives you the scale as well as reports based on that scale, just to give you a flavor. All right, switch it back over to you.